According to Mark Stein, Gary Trent Jr. is undeniably available for a trade. So we'll discuss that, as well as Masai Ujiri's approach and plan for this year's trade deadline has been outlined and revealed in a couple of reports. We have Fred VanVleet speaking out on his contract situation, a whole bunch more to cover in this video. So without further ado, let's jump to the first topic of discussion. The first thing we're taking a look at is Gary Trent Jr., quote, undeniably available for a trade. Now, the star boy Gary Trent Jr. has had an up and down season this year, as started off the season coming in hot, knocking down some shots, shooting well from the three-point line, and then for about a month and a half there, was playing pretty bad. It was getting to the point where he was moved to the bench, and it wasn't looking good for Gary Trent Jr. People were saying we got to get rid of this guy, especially where he's a free agent coming this summer. People were not happy with Gary Trent Jr.'s performance. However, things went along and Gary bounced back, came back into a form, and just like regular, your usual high volume bucket getters, people that take tough shots and make tough shots, he has those ebbs and flows, and Gary Trent Jr. is back to playing well, and his overall stats for the season have been solid. For a guy, shooting lots of threes per game, he's shooting now up to 38% from behind the three-point line, up to 18 points per game. His rebounds have increased, his assists have increased at 2.7 and 2 assists per game. His steals are up to 1.7 where they were last year. So Gary Trent Jr. is back to being the guy that Toronto Raptors fans were hoping he was going to be coming into the year, and playing like the star boy we were all hoping to see. So that's been a huge positive for Raptors fans, and it's led a lot of fans to say, hey, we know with this trade deadline coming up, we know moves have to be made. People are excited. They're trying to have deals be done and this Raptors roster be adjusted, even though we're just coming off a nice win against the Blazers. But news has come out now from Mark Stein that will have the Gary Trent Jr.'s fans a little bit disappointed, a little bit sad in what's going on, as it's come out that Gary Trent Jr. is undeniably available for a trade ahead of this year's trade deadline. Mark Stein essentially broke down that him and Tim Hardaway Jr. are two wings that are, 3-and-D guys, even though Gary Trent Jr. is more of a defensive player than Tim Hardaway Jr. More of both, because Tim Hardaway Jr.'s had... If Gary Trent Jr.'s had an up-and-down year, Tim Hardaway has had an extremely up-and-down season, but essentially saying that both of those guys are undeniably available, they're being shopped, and the contract situation is a big reason because of it. The Toronto Raptors have a lot of players that are on their books right now and have to get paid. Pascal Siakam, big money. OG Anunoby's on a relatively big contract. It's cheap for the production he's been providing, but still a significant hit to the cap. You have Scottie Barnes, who you have to manage for in a couple seasons, and you have Fred VanVleet, who could opt into his player option this summer. We'll discuss Fred VanVleet's contract situation as the video goes along, but he's going to be expecting a bag for years to go ahead. And Gary Trent Jr. coming into the season looked like the guy that could be the odd man out for the Toronto Raptors. And given this report, it seems like that's potentially the case, because with OG's emergence, with his ability, I've made it known on these pods that I could see, just given his value being so high, that the Raptors do cash in and sell high on OG and Anunoby, even though I'm hoping they desperately don't end up trading OG. But Gary Trent Jr. could be that dude that's eventually moved. And with reports that have been coming out left, right, and center, every other week we hear a new Gary Trent Jr. rumor, a new potential package, whatever's going on. And obviously, especially when you're a month out from the trade deadline, a couple months out, more speculation, more chatter rather than official Woj bombs, big reports about deals being shopped and all that sort of stuff. But there's that, with all that chatter, it makes sense that the reports, the rumors are all going to get a lot more intense as we inch closer to this trade deadline. So let me know what you guys think about the Toronto Raptors potentially making a move, as it seems like a deal's definitely going to go down. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, right, you guys can start making predictions. And I've made an official prediction that I think a trade will come down to the trade deadline. I have to make these a little bit more official, but or a little bit more juicy, more spicy. But if you guys want to make some predictions, whether it be about trades, which we'll have a couple of features coming up, definitely check out the Coolbet app, as you can bet on any Toronto Raptors game, any NBA game, any sport in general, right? You can use the Coolbet app to make your predictions, make things a little bit more interesting. They're regulated in Ontario. They're available all across Canada, and the best sportsbook. They've been supporting the channel for the last month or so, and it's a great interface. They're great guys over there. And if you guys sign up, you can join our Cool Betters Discord and get custom boosted odds, have your input in terms of bets that you want to see happen on the Coolbet app. We'll talk directly to those guys and get you guys your bets. So if you're interested, definitely check out the Coolbet app. But speaking of predictions, speaking of what's going on, we got some insight in terms of Masai Ujiri's plans, approach heading to this year's trade deadline. Now, this is a pretty interesting one, as Masai Ujiri, the Raptors like to hold their cards close to their vest, but this season it seems like a lot more has sort of been leaked, a lot more has been coming out surrounding this Toronto Raptors team, and we got some reports coming out involving Toronto Raptors' approach to this year's deadline. As this one's coming from Tim Bontemps saying that, so while scouts and executives have pointed to teams like the Atlanta Hawks, Chicago Bulls, Wizards joining Toronto as potential teams ahead of next month's trade deadline, there's less urgency for middling teams to make moves. It all makes sense for teams less inclined to throw in the towel, another Eastern Conference executive said. That is certainly how the Toronto Raptors view things, as they've insisted that they'll take until the end of the month at least to decide where they're headed. And as they evaluate the situation, a few factors will play into their choice they will ultimately make. So Tim Bontemps essentially saying, I just took a little excerpt from his article, I won't read the whole thing in this one, but the Toronto Raptors, while we heard a few weeks ago that the Toronto Raptors really are going to wait till mid-January to evaluate where they're at this season, figure out what they're going to do with this roster, because they have a lot of talent on their roster, and other parts of the article discussed how other Eastern Conference executives even brought up there's lots of great players on the Toronto Raptors that would outshine the value of players on other teams if they're potentially available, but it just hasn't worked. The amalgamation of all the talent the Toronto Raptors has this season just hasn't really been translating into wins. So if they do make the moves, there'll be a lot of eyes peeled to sort of acquire them, and the Toronto Raptors are going to make the decision whether or not they're sellers, whether or not they're buyers, mid-January. That's what all the reports, everything indicated. But now Tim Bontemps is saying that the Raptors are really going to hold out longer, and we could be waiting another couple weeks to see any big moves go down for the Toronto Raptors, as they're going to wait till the end of the month. And it makes sense, because still, with this team, given how the season has rolled out, I still have no idea how to view this Toronto Raptors team. Some games we look horrible, we look brutal, we look bad, and even when we're fully healthy, we just come out and drop duds. Then even from within quarter to quarter, right? We have games where we score 12 points in a quarter, and then in the fourth, we come out and score 16 points in the matter of a minute. So this team has been on an absolute roller coaster this season, so I get why Masai Ujiri doesn't want to make any rash decisions, because we need a bigger sample size, and we'll probably still need a bigger sample size come the trade deadline to figure out where this team is at. But as the article broke down, there's a lot of middling teams in the Eastern Conference. KD looks like he's going to be out for a little while now. The Eastern Conference is still wide open, so there's no real desperate need to tank, as a lot of teams are sort of approaching. And then we had another report essentially say the Raptors are currently tied for the 11th place in the Eastern Conference. Toronto's 2 games ahead of the final spot of the play-in, 2 games out, tournament. By any measure, they've underachieved this season, yet league sources caution expecting the Raptors to undergo a major sell-off ahead of the trade deadline at February 9th. Toronto may make some trades, but they aren't likely to blow up their roster. The Raptors are asking for huge hauls for either OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam, but Toronto has made Gary Trent Jr. available to be traded on the market. Trent has a player option for the $18.8 million next season. He's expected to decline. So another report indicating that Gary Trent Jr. is on the table. More reports saying that we have discussed trades involving Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby, but while the discussions, may lead to fireworks that we've also heard reports on, people caution it as the Raptors are looking for massive hauls back for all of our players, which I'm 100% in agreement with. I don't think the Toronto Raptors have any desperate need to blow up this roster, to tank, in the sense that we should sell off all our guys for draft picks, for, selling low on some of our players. So I do agree with that. It doesn't seem like Fred VanVleet's in any of these trade discussions as well. But, if a package does come back and we do go in a younger direction, I'm cool with it as long as it's a massive haul in return. So the Raptors are in that middling stage. They're feeling out all potential routes, all potential avenues, and we'll see what ends up happening. But don't expect any big moves to be made. unless it's a major haul prior to the end of the month. So that's a little update on that front. The next thing we're discussing in this vid is Fred VanVleet clarifies his contract situation. Now, we broke it down in the last video how Fred VanVleet reportedly turned down a $114 million contract extension this summer, and Fred clarified what really went on behind the scenes, because I broke down that report from Josh Bloomberg. Bloomberg posted this screenshot here as well, so I'll just read Fred VanVleet's quote verbatim. Essentially saying that, let me make this statement on the contract. I spoke about it before the season. Again, would never speak on my free agency. I would never speak on my free agency or contract negotiations, especially conversations between management, me and management. So I certainly didn't come from me. I was never made any formal offer. I think we all understand what comes with the contract extension due to the CBA. If you understand how the cap works and how the contracts work, there's 2-year anniversary at Sparks, the discussion of taking an extension. There was never any formal offer made. It was a mutual decision by both sides, as the smart thing to do would be would be to wait it out. There was no rush given that I could still sign the extension all the way throughout the end of the season. I also have a player option in my contract this summer that we can deal with at the end of the season. I also am on the books for next year, so take my word for it. I understand we're in an era of taking 2 sentences out of an article and making a tweet about them, and all of a sudden getting 300 messages last night, it turned down 114 million, which is not the case. So it was a little misleading. I'm disappointed that it's come out. I don't want to be a distraction. I'm not going to be speaking on any other contract situations regarding my contract this year. Essentially saying he's focused on the team, as he should be. So while I like that Fred VanVleet clarified, so it was a mutual decision. It wasn't like he was offered and then declined and everything that's going on with the cap. We kind of discussed that in our video, but he could have accepted an offer. And now Grange and Josh Bloomberg both said he was offered it, right? The Raptors were willing to give it to him. So it's not that, I guess, as Fred VanVleet said, he turned down $114 million. But if he wanted it, if he still wants it probably, or I don't know if the Raptors are still willing to, give him that contract, he still sort of didn't jump on the opportunity, didn't pounce on a potential contract extension, which a lot of Raptors fans would be disappointed if he ended up signing now. But I think still, I'm not down on the Fred VanVleet. I'm not on the Fred VanVleet hate wagon right now, but it's, Fred VanVleet, there's truth. I think he's sort of, it wasn't a lie what Bloomberg and Michael Grange reported in terms of him not taking that max contract last offseason, because he didn't do it. And in that sense, he turned it down as it seemed like the Raptors were willing to give it to him, but maybe he wasn't formally offered. They probably just discussed, hey, makes sense for me to be a free agent next year, but at least Fred VanVleet got his input on the situation, got his voice out there. So, we'll see what ends up coming of Fred VanVleet's contract situation, because he wants a bag coming into next year. Now, the final thing we're discussing, the final thing we're taking a look at in this video is Scottie Barnes and Thaddeus Young's argument, which I briefly chatted on in the post-game reaction last night. As halftime last game, Scottie Barnes and Thaddeus Young looked to get in a little bit of a verbal contest. They got into a little disagreement out there visibly on the court. I'll play it on the screen here now, but basically Thaddeus Young, Scottie Barnes, they're not being held back from each other. They're having a little argument about what's going on. They're getting in each other's face just a little bit. Thaddeus Young's getting a little bit closer. Obviously the vet trying to talk to the rookie. Scottie Barnes not really having much of it. Waving them off. The Juancho Hernan-Gomez and Christian Coloco, those 2 guys are in the middle of things there. Scottie Barnes doesn't seem too happy with what's going on. A lot of people watched this video. A lot of people saw what was sort of happening. If you want to lip read, you can see what Scottie Barnes is saying out there on the screen there now. But I said in the live post-game reaction I discussed in this video, I said, before anything came out on it, it was 100% a whole lot of nothing. Scottie Barnes, Thaddeus Young don't seem like 2 guys that are going to be locker room cancers or anything like that. But, and we also got wind of it too from Scottie and Thaddeus Young following the post game, essentially saying, Thad said, we just had a disagreement, no different than brothers going back and forth, especially when you're both passionate about the game. He and Barnes hugged it out and said they loved each other afterwards. They both say they've already moved on. So, Scottie Barnes said he loves Thaddeus Young as well in a quote post game. Whole lot of nothing. Let's not make any drama out of Thaddeus Young and Scottie Barnes having a little disagreement out there on the court. But folks, you guys are the best for making this far. Subscribe to the channel. We're really close to 27,000 subs. So if you want to support the channel, definitely hit that subscribe button. And also check out the Coolbet app. Helps us out big time. But you guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.